Alexander the Great conquered half the known world, then without naming a clear successor. Great job, Alex. What followed was 40 years of elephant-riding lunatics, idealists, psychopaths, and a guy with a siege tower obsession. These were the Diadochi, Alexander's top generals. Today I'll talk about the best, worst, and straight up weirdest of them, from actual kings, to naval explorers, to whatever the heck Demetrius was. Boo me, I don't care, I hate this guy. Cassander is what happens when you take a guy with political ambition, a major inferiority complex, and no military charisma, and hand him the keys to Macedonia. The son of Antipeter, Cassander grew up in the shadow of giants like Alexander and his father's generational reputation, but when daddy and handed power to Perkon instead of his own son, Cassander decided it was murder o'clock. He launched a campaign of cold, methodical brutality that would make even the worst HBO anti-heroes pause. He didn't just want the throne, he wanted to erase any possible rival, including Roxana and Alexander IV, Alexander's wife and teenage son, who he had quietly executed. Just like that, the Argead dynasty was gone. Let me rephrase this if you aren't freaking out. The ancient Greek royal house of Alexander the Great was gone, and Cassander, well, he got what he wanted. He ruled Macedon, founded cities like Thessaloniki, and brought a veneer of normalcy to a country that had just exploded. But despite his effectiveness, there's no grand legacy here. No golden age, no epic campaigns, no statues, just a man who saw a power vacuum and sucked up every ounce of oxygen with surgical efficiency. He was a cold-blooded bureaucrat of death, evil, effective, and ultimately forgettable. The following characters are vaguely ranked, meaning they're all relatively cool. Pretend like the rankings are flexible, please. Craterus is the Diadochus everyone expected to win until the plot armor wore off. During Alexander's lifetime, he was one of the most respected generals in the entire army, beloved by the troops, admired by his peers, and positioned as a natural leader once Alexander was gone. The man had everything going for him: charisma, military success, and the endorsement of Alexander's veterans, who would have followed him to the underworld and back. So, what happened? Well, he got sent back to Europe just before Alexander died. And when the Wars of Succession kicked off, he jumped into the fray on Team Antipeter. He ended up fighting Humanis, yes, I'll cover him shortly, and somehow got himself killed in the process. That's right, Humanis took down Craterus. And just like that, he was gone. His death shocked everyone. And not just because he was a big deal, it was because the one guy who could have maybe unified the empire didn't even make it to the second act. Antipeter was the old man in the room, and frankly, the only adult supervision the Diadochi ever had. While Alexander was off conquering Persia, Antipeter stayed home and held Greece together, which basically meant putting out constant fires and being asked to babysit the ancient world's rowdiest city-states. He didn't chase glory, he didn't build an empire, he just wanted things to stay functional while the Golden Boy was off playing God King. And he did a good job, until Alexander died, that is, and everyone started sharpening their knives. Antipeter returned to the scene like a disappointed dad at a family reunion, crushed a few revolts, reasserted control, and was widely respected. But then it came time to pass the torch, and he made one huge mistake. He picked Perkon as his successor instead of his own son, Cassander. Which is fair enough, Cassander was a that sparked a whole new chain of betrayals, murders, and general chaos, because of course it did. Still, Antipeter wasn't a flashy conqueror, but he was a rock, and without him, the empire probably would have collapsed a lot sooner. The fan favorite Humanis. Humanis is the classic underdog, a Milesian Greek from Thrace in a Macedonian Greek warlord showdown. Yes, the Macedonians were Greek. He went from Alexander's secretary to unstoppable field commander. Born outside the elite Macedonian nobility, he worked his way up as a bureaucrat with a brain and a sword, which already makes him stand out. But Humanis wasn't just smart, he was loyal. Painfully, stupidly loyal to the Argead dynasty, long after that dynasty was basically just a kid locked in a palace and a fading family name. And that loyalty, well, it almost worked. He defeated Craterus, yes, that Craterus, which was basically the Diadochi equivalent of a mailroom clerk submitting the winning proposal and getting the CEO fired. But despite his tactical brilliance, the Diadochi generals never truly accepted him. Remember, Greeks hated each other just as much, if not more, than they hated barbarians. His troops betrayed him to Antigonist, who had him executed, though reportedly with great reluctance. Even his enemies admired him. Basically, a brilliant outsider who played the game better than most, but couldn't beat the system. Antigonist the One-Eyed, easily the most badass sounding name in the entire Diadochi lineup. The man lost an eye in battle and just kept going like nothing happened, which kind of sums up his whole character. He was one of the oldest and most experienced generals in Alexander's army, and when the empire broke apart, he didn't just grab a piece of it.
What do you mean by that?
He tried to glue the whole thing back together. While everyone else was carving out mini kingdoms like insecure warlords, Antigonist went full rebuild the empire mode. He crushed Humanis, declared himself king before anyone else had the guts guts to do it and looked poised to become the new Alexander. But hubris, my friends, is a Diadochi tradition. Eventually, the other generals got tired of his world-conquering ambitions and teamed up to crush him at the Battle of Ipsus. He died on the field, sword in hand, one eye, no regrets. His empire didn't survive, but the dynasty did. His son was Demetrius Poliorcetes, so clearly the drama was hereditary. Leonatus had all the pieces to become a major player in the Diadochi mess. Military cred, royal connections, ambition, and he was a very handsome fella, as in, his statues do him justice level of good looking. After Alexander died, he was one of the first guys to step up and say, hey, I could totally run this empire. He had already proven himself in battle under Alexander, and even got offered the hand of Cleopatra, not the Egyptian queen, but Alexander's sister, which was basically the ancient Greek version of, do you want a crown with that? This could have been huge. Marrying Cleopatra might have given him a legitimate claim to Alexander's throne, but before he could seal the deal, he marched off to deal with a rebellion in Greece, and promptly died in battle. That's it. His career peaked somewhere between royal marriage proposal and before Act 2. Still, he was clearly a rising star, the kind of guy who would have either ruled half the empire or been assassinated within a year. The Diadochi universe's biggest almost. Great setup, no payoff. Pthon is one of those Diadochi you almost forget about until you realize he had a shot at building his own empire, and completely blew it by trying to play diplomat in a world full of axe-wielding lunatics. After Alexander's death, Pthon was made satrap of Media, which was a critical territory in the east. Instead of going full tyrant like everyone else, he tried to do something noble. Unify the eastern provinces and bring a little order to the chaos. Mistake. Huge mistake. The other satraps didn't appreciate his peacekeeping vision, and when he tried to assert control, they ganged up on him. He hung on for a while, bounced between allegiances, and even got close to Antigonist, who then saw him as a rival and had him executed. Pthon wasn't ruthless enough for the game he was playing. Wrong guy, wrong time, wrong empire. Okay, this is a personal inclusion. Narcus is the honorary Diadochus on this list, not because he carved out a kingdom or ruled anything after Alexander's death, but because he literally sailed across the edge of the known world and survived. That deserves respect. What is it with Greek explorers in the 4th century BC? As Alexander's admiral, Narcus was given the unenviable task of taking the fleet from the mouth of the Indus River along the hostile, nearly uncharted coast of modern-day Pakistan and Iran, all the way to the Persian Gulf. The expedition was brutal. Storms, starvation, terrible terrain, angry locals, and questionable maps, but somehow he pulled it off. That journey alone makes him legendary. He wrote about it too, giving us some of the earliest first-hand accounts of the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea, which weren't oral tradition. After Alexander died, Narcus didn't jump into the warlord free-for-all. He hung around the court of Antigonist and later Salucas, but never tried to grab power. He didn't want a throne, just a working boat and a good story to tell. Perkon. Remember this guy? No? That's fine. Neither does history half the time. He was an old general under Alexander and a loyal supporter of Antipeter, who for some reason handed him control of Macedon instead of his own son, Cassander. This guy again? Perkon tried to pick up the pieces and keep the empire from turning into a free-for-all. He backed the Argead line, tried to install Alexander IV as king, and even worked with Olympia, Alexander's terrifying mother. That part actually worked for a minute, until Cassander crushed them both. Someone and basically rewrote Macedonian history with a sword. Perkon faded into obscurity after that, wandering around the edges of the conflict like a forgotten side quest. Demetrius was the drama. The son of Antigonist the One-Eyed, he inherited not just a military machine, but the full-blown diva energy of a man who believed war should be both brutal and fabulous. He earned the nickname Poliorcetes, the Besieger, because this guy did not do subtle. During the siege of Rhodes, he rolled up with a 40-meter-tall siege tower, a walking war monument called the Hellepolis, meaning city taker, and tried to take the city by force and flair. He failed, but the Rhodians were so impressed by his sheer audacity that they built the Colossus of Rhodes to celebrate themselves for surviving him. Rad. Demetrius also took Athens, partied like a living god, wore gold robes, and genuinely tried to blend Dionysius cosplay with actual kingship. But after the Battle of Ipsus, where his dad was killed, things went downhill. He spent years drifting with a mercenary army like an ancient Hellenistic Mad Max, until Salucas captured him and kept him under luxury house arrest. Not the best general, arguably the worst, but absolutely the most entertaining. Perticus is the guy who sprinted to the front line after Alexander died, shouted, "I got this," and then immediately tripped over his own ambition. Appointed regent of the empire in the initial post-Alexander scramble, he technically had the most power, overseeing the central administration and guardianship of Alexander's heir, the infant Alexander IV. And at first, it looked like he might pull it off. But Perticus made one fatal mistake. He tried to do everything at once. He aimed to marry Cleopatra, Alexander's sister, to legitimize his rule, which absolutely freaked out the other Diadochi. Then he picked a fight with Ptolemy, who had locked down in Egypt and was just vibing with his stolen corpse of Alexander. Perticus launched an invasion across the Nile, and it was a disaster. Boats capsized, morale imploded, and his soldiers, already annoyed with his leadership, decided they'd had enough. They mutinied and murdered him in his own tent. No throne, no glory, no legacy. Just a warning to every future Diadochus: don't get cocky. He was the legitimate successor, aside from Alexander's son, obviously, but he was naive. A guy who had the map in his hands and still got lost. Salucas is the Diadochus who started with practically nothing and finished with everything. He wasn't a major figure during Alexander's lifetime, but after the dust settled, Salucas quietly began building what would become the largest of all the successor empires, the Seleucid Empire. He got kicked out of Babylon, reconquered it, and then just kept going, taking Persia, Mesopotamia, Syria, parts of Anatolia, and basically everywhere east of Ptolemy. The man was patient, strategic, and played the long game like a chess grandmaster with war elephants. Oh, and speaking of elephants, he loved them. After an alliance with Indian king Chandragupta Maurya, he got hundreds of the things and used them to crush rivals like it was ancient biological warfare. His crowning moment, killing Lysimachus in battle, and for a brief moment, being the last true Diadochus left standing. He founded dozens of cities, including Seleucia and Antioch, built infrastructure, and most importantly, didn't die. Not the flashiest, but absolutely the one who outlived and outplayed the rest. Except for... And finally, surprising no one, we have Ptolemy, the most level-headed warlord in a sea of lunatics. While the rest of the Diadochi were out here building siege towers, assassinating and dying on battlefields, Ptolemy just looked at Egypt and called dibs. And most importantly, he kept it. Smart, adaptable, and probably the most stable of the bunch, Ptolemy didn't overreach. He fortified Egypt, turned it into a cultural powerhouse, and watched as everyone else tore each other to pieces. When Perticus came after him, he drowned his invasion army in the Nile. He also stole Alexander's body and brought it to Memphis. His dynasty, the Ptolemies, lasted nearly 300 years and ended with Cleopatra. So you could say he did all right. Oh, and he founded the Library of Alexandria. That's right, that Library of Alexandria. Low drama, high IQ, left behind a dynasty, and didn't get in a tent somewhere. Nice. Oh, and shout out to Lysimachus, the Diadochus I totally forgot, my bad. You ruled Thrace, Asia Minor, and Macedon, and still died in battle like a boss. Respect. Do you agree with my list? Think someone deserves a promotion or historical demotion? Start a civil war in the comments, in typical Diadochi fashion. I'll be there to mediate and likely get Perticast. Let me know what I should do next. Should I keep it Greek? Maybe dive into the 26 cantons of Switzerland? The Varangian Guard maybe? Or should I spice it up with something French? The power's in your hands. Bye.